The airport was a city within a city, alive with movement and noise. Screens flickered with departure times. Announcements echoed, tinny and repetitive, bouncing off high glass ceilings. The scent of coffee, jet fuel, and polished marble blended into the strange perfume of an international terminal. At Gate C-27, the scene should have been routine. Passengers lined up by boarding group, boarding passes ready, faces set in that practiced massive impatience every frequent flyer wore. But routine cracked a moment the gate agent looked up from her monitor, hesitated, and frowned. "Sir," she said, her tone already clipped defensive, "this ticket isn't valid. I'll need you to step aside." The words hung in the air like smoke. Damian Hayes didn't move. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need announcement. His suit was charcoal, tailored with precision. His shoes polished but understated. No gold chains, no designer logo screaming across his chest. Just the stillness of a man who never needed to prove himself. He held out the boarding pass again. Steady. The holographic shimmer of Apex Air's first-class priority seal caught the overhead light. "It is valid," he said, voice calm, measured. "C2A. Confirmed yesterday. Checked in this morning." Behind him, the line began to ripple with whispers. A businessman sighed loudly and shifted his briefcase to the other hand. A young couple leaned sideways to peek around Damian, curiosity sparking in their eyes. The agent didn't look at the boarding pass again. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She tapped her keyboard with ferocity meant to suggest authority, not necessity. "I said step aside, sir. We have other passengers waiting to board." There it was, the shift, the subtle drop in tone. Not sir as acknowledgement, but sir as dismissal. A formality masking a judgment already made. Damian's jaw tightened once, briefly, then relaxed. He knew this theater. He had played this role before more times than he could count. The refusal to scan the pass wasn't about technology. It was about him, about what she saw when she looked up from her screen. A black man standing alone in front of a velvet rope meant for privilege. From the crowd, a voice muttered, too loud to be accidental, "Hold up's gonna make us late." A woman rolled her eyes and pulled her designer shawl tighter around her shoulders. Another man smirked, as if watching a scene he'd already decided the ending to. Damian glanced once at the screen above the gate. Flight 417, Apex Air, New York to Chicago. Boarding Group 1. First class. On time. Everything as it should be. Except him. "Check it again," he said evenly, placing the boarding pass on the counter. Not a request. A statement. The agent, young blonde bob, corporate scarf knotted too tightly, hesitated just long enough for discomfort to spread. Then, like a cue in a play, a supervisor appeared at her side. He was older, silver streaks in his hair, the kind of man who carried authority like a shield. His name tag read Coleman. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice already carrying the answer. The agent gestured to Damian, without meeting his eyes. "Invalid pass." Coleman took the ticket, glanced at it for no more than a second, and handed it back. "Sir, this seat has been reassigned. You'll need to wait over there." He pointed to a patch of carpet near the wall, far from the priority lane. The words over there landed harder than the denial itself. Damian didn't move. "Reassigned?" Coleman's expression didn't flicker. "Yes, computer glitch. Happens occasionally." A glitch that downgraded an executive platinum passenger with 3 million miles? Damian asked, voice still low but sharp enough to cut. A pause, just long enough to confirm what he already knew. It wasn't a glitch. It was a decision, and that pause gave the crowd permission. A man in a salmon polo shirt, collar popped like a teenager, barked a laugh. "Come on, buddy, take the hint. They don't want you up there. Premium economy's not so bad." His words oozed with condescension, the kind that assumed everyone else would share the joke. The laughter spread, not loud, but enough. A ripple of smirks, of sidelong glances, of eyes sliding away when caught. The unspoken chorus. He doesn't belong here. He should just accept it. Damian turned his head slowly toward the man. Just one look, not at his watch, not at his shoes, but into his eyes. a gaze steady enough to freeze the smirk on his lips. Then he turned back to Coleman. My boarding pass was issued yesterday. Seat 2A, Damien said, every word deliberate. I arrived early. I checked in at your lounge. This is not a glitch. Coleman's jaw hardened. Sir, please don't make this more difficult. The other passenger's priority. And there it was, the truth, dressed in corporate politeness. The other passenger's priority. Damien's silence stretched. He looked past Coleman, through the glass windows of the jet bridge, at the gleaming white fuselage of the Apex A321, a machine that represented billions of dollars in contracts, thousands of employees, and a global brand. A machine that, in this moment, was being undermined by one small, ugly act. He could have argued louder. He could have demanded escalation. He could have pulled rank with his status, his wealth, his reputation. But none of it mattered. Not here. Not in the eyes looking at him, as though he were an interloper at their table. Coleman's voice pressed again, firmer now. Sir, I'm asking you to step aside before we involve security. The threat was quiet, but unmistakable. The kind that had ended badly for countless others. The kind that turned patience into humiliation. Damien inhaled once, deeply. Then he exhaled. His face betrayed nothing. He reached down, picked up his briefcase, and slipped the boarding pass back into his pocket. I see, he said softly. And with that, he stepped out of the line. Not hurried, not defeated. Calm, measured, unshaken on the surface. But inside, the calculation had already begun. Every detail logged. Every word remembered. Behind him, the scanner beeped, green, as Coleman waved the next passenger through. The woman in the shawl swept past without a glance. The man in the salmon polo grinned as he shouldered his way forward, smug in his victory. The velvet rope fell back into place, as if nothing had happened. But something had. At that gate, in that single moment of dismissal, an empire's future shifted. The humiliation was the spark. What it would ignite, no one around him yet understood. Damien walked away without looking back. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The hum of the Admiral's Club was a soft murmur compared to the chaos of the gate. Leather chairs, polished tables, the faint clink of glass against glass. A place designed for calm, for control, for people who lived above the fray. Damien Hayes sat in one of the corner conference rooms, separated by glass walls from the rest of the lounge. The door clicked shut behind him, muting the laughter and murmured business calls of other frequent flyers. For the first time in an hour, he was alone. He set his briefcase down on the polished table and lowered himself into the chair with deliberate precision. He moved like a man carrying invisible weight, though his face gave nothing away. The boarding pass was still in his breast pocket, the paper edges pressing lightly against his chest, a reminder as sharp as a blade. He closed his eyes. The scene replayed instantly, as vivid as if he were still standing at gate C-27. The clipped tone of the gate agent, Coleman's firm, dismissive voice, the laughter from the man in the salmon polo, the ripple of passengers who didn't even bother to hide their smirks. The humiliation hadn't been loud. It hadn't needed to be. It was surgical, efficient, wrapped in the kind of bureaucratic language that left no fingerprints. Invalid pass. Reassigned. Priority. Words as weapons. Words that dress prejudice in the clean suit of corporate policy. His stomach tightened once, a knot of old, familiar fury. But it passed. Anger was too expensive. He had learned that long ago. The world watched anger and dismissed it as overreaction. But silence unsettled them. Silence made them lean forward and wonder what you were planning. Damien's silence now was not defeat. It was calculation. He leaned back, loosening his tie by half an inch, and stared at his own reflection in the glass wall. A black man in his 40s. A billionaire. A founder of a company that had redefined global logistics with algorithms so precise governments had sought to license them. And yet, to a gate agent, to a supervisor, to a smug passenger in a pink polo, he had been just another man to move aside. He thought of his father, a bus driver in Chicago who had once been told by a passenger to drive faster, boy, in front of a full bus. His father had told that story not in bitterness, but as a warning. You'll work twice as hard, Damien. And when they tell you it's not enough, you'll work twice as hard again. Damien had done more than that. He had built an empire. He had turned a scholarship to MIT into a legacy, turned one logistics algorithm into ethereal dynamics, a titan valued in the billions. He had shaken hands with presidents, stood on stages in Davos, negotiated contracts that shifted global markets. And still, at Gate C-27, none of it mattered. To them, he had been out of place. A mistake, a seat reassigned. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the worn paperback of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. The spine was cracked, the pages dog-eared. It had traveled with him longer than any assistant, longer than any suit. His anchor, his reminder. He thumbed to a passage he had underlined years ago. If you are pained by external things, it is not that disturb you, but your own judgment of them, and it is in your power to wipe out that judgment now. He breathed once, steady. Aurelius was right. He could not control the gate agent. He could not control Coleman. He could not control the man in the salmon polo and his smug laugh, but he could control his response. His eyes drifted to his phone, resting black and silent on the table. One call, he thought. One call could redraw the lines of power between him and the company that had just humiliated him. Not a call made in anger, not a call to shout or demand apology, but a call rooted in principle. He thought of tomorrow's schedule, the Apex Air signing, $500 million, a deal that would stitch his company's technology into the airline's nervous system, saving them from their own decline. Apex's executives had begged for it. Their CEO had flown to New York twice to court him. They had painted it as a partnership of the future. And yet their people, their system, had looked at him and decided he didn't belong. If they could humiliate their most valuable passenger over a boarding pass, what would they do with the keys to a global logistics empire? If they could lie about a glitch to cover a prejudice, what kind of lies would they tell when systems failed in the air? He wasn't angry anymore. He was certain. His mind flicked back to the faces at the gate. The agent's clipped tone, Coleman's rigid certainty, the salmon polo smirk, and Sarah, the flight attendant who had looked at him with wide, apologetic eyes before quickly looking away. She had known it was wrong. She had been powerless to stop it. She would become part of the collateral damage. That was the truth of Apex Air. Not just prejudice, but a culture of complicity. People who knew but stayed silent. People who enforced rules not out of integrity, but out of fear. He rubbed the corner of the boarding pass between his thumb and forefinger. The paper bent easily, fragile. So was the airline. They just didn't know it yet. Outside the glass wall, other passengers lounged with champagne and tablets. The theater of wealth and status playing uninterrupted. A man laughed too loudly at something on his phone. A woman in pearls gestured sharply to a server about the temperature of her latte. All of them lived in the illusion that their world was permanent, untouchable. But Damien knew better. He had built his empire on the understanding that systems, no matter how polished, were always one flaw away from collapse. And Apex had just revealed his flaw. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to demand anything. He didn't even need to show anger. His power was quieter, sharper. A scalpel, not a hammer. He picked up his phone. He stared at the screen for a long moment, the reflection of his face staring back. Then, slowly, his thumb slid across the glass, waking it. A list of contacts glowed back at him. His assistant's number was at the top, Chloe Martinez. Efficient, unshakable, the operational core of ethereal dynamics. She would understand instantly. She wouldn't argue. But not yet. He let the phone fall back to the table. Not yet. He wanted to sit with the weight of the decision a little longer, not because he doubted it, but because he respected it. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. He closed Meditations and placed it neatly beside the phone. He folded his hands in front of him, gaze steady, posture still. In the silence of that glass-walled room, Damien Hayes made his choice. The humiliation at Gate C-27 would not pass quietly into memory. It would not be another story told over drinks about the casual indignities of travel. No, this one would matter. This one would ripple, and by the time the world understood, it would already be too late. The decision, when it came, was quiet. No theatrics, no flare temper, no raised voice. Just a thumb-pressing dial on a black phone screen. The line clicked once, twice. Then, "Chloe," he said. "Damien?" Her voice was brisk, efficient, threaded with surprise. "I thought you'd be in the air by now. Did something happen?" "Plans have changed," Damien replied evenly. He could see his own reflection in the glass wall, calm, unflinching. "I need you to cancel tomorrow's signing with Apex Air." Silence. For the first time in years, his assistant didn't have words ready. "Cancel the signing? Sir, forgive me, but that's the $600 million contract. The one sterling." "Yes," Damien cut in. His tone wasn't harsh, but brooked no space for discussion. "Terminate all negotiations. Draft a notice of intent withdrawal. Cite material breach of shared values. Make sure it lands on their general counsel's desk within the hour." He could hear the click of Chloe's keyboard as her mind shifted into execution mode. Still, she asked carefully, "Do you want to give a reason?" "No," Damien said. "They'll know." She paused. He imagined her sitting at her glass desk back at headquarters, immaculate as always, heels tucked neatly under her chair, her mind racing but her tone composed. "Understood. I'll have legal deliver the notice immediately. Do you still want me to prepare for the press release?" "Nothing public." "Not yet." He reached for the worn copy of Meditations and closed it with one hand. "This isn't about revenge. It's about principle. Let Apex unravel itself." "Yes, Damien." Her voice was steady again, a fortress rebuilt in seconds. "I'll handle it." He ended the call. That was it. 1 minute. One order. A scalpel, not a hammer. At Apex Air's headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, the mood couldn't have been more different. The glass tower gleamed in the morning sun, filled with the buzz of anticipation. Executives in bespoke suits crowded into the top-floor boardroom, champagne chilling in silver buckets, contracts neatly stacked in leather folders. The company's CEO, Richard Sterling, was practically glowing. "Today, gentlemen, is the day Apex Air reclaims the skies," Sterling declared, striding across the room with the vigor of a man who believed history was on his side. His tan was perpetual, his smile white and rehearsed. "Project Helix is our resurrection. A $600 million deal that guarantees our future." The executives nodded, eager, desperate. Apex's stock had been limping for months, its fleet aging, its reputation slipping. The Ethereal Dynamics partnership was a miracle, their salvation, and tomorrow's signing ceremony was meant to be their rebirth. But miracles have a way of dying quietly. At 11:04 a.m., Sterling's desk phone rang. The red line, direct from legal. He frowned, picked it up. Sterling. On the other end, David Chun, chief legal officer, spoke with a tension that cut through every word. "Richard, we have a problem." Sterling sighed, rolling his eyes for the benefit of the room. "What is it now, David? Did Ethereal's lawyers quibble over a clause again? We've given them everything." "No, it's worse. Much worse. We just received a notice of termination of intent from Ethereal Dynamics." The room froze. Sterling blinked, the words sliding past him as if in another language. "Termination? That's impossible. The signing is tomorrow." "They've invoked Section 4, subsection B," David said grimly. "Material breach of shared corporate values. It's discretionary. Ironclad. They're walking away. Effective immediately." A pin could have dropped in that boardroom and shattered glass. Sterling's hand whitened around the phone. "Get Damien Hayes on the line. Right now." "I already tried," David replied. His assistant intercepted. Said Mr. Hayes is unavailable, and all further communication goes through legal. The glass of champagne Sterling had been holding slipped, crashing onto the carpet. He didn't notice. His vision tunneled. This makes no sense. Something must have happened. Something big. What time did the notice come in? 11:04 Eastern, David said. Sterling's mind raced. He remembered Hayes was supposed to be in the air around then. flying to Chicago. He was on one of their flights. Flight 417, out of JFK. His stomach dropped. Get me the passenger manifest and the purser's report for 417. Sterling snapped. Now. 20 minutes later, the boardroom had transformed into a war room. Executives crowded around a tablet displaying the purser's report, their faces pale, their suits suddenly too tight. Sterling read it once, then again, his breath shallow. Seating dispute involving passenger in 2A. Claim glitch in system. Passenger D. Hayes to board voluntarily after compensation offer. Situation resolved. Flight delayed 22 minutes. Sterling's lips moved silently as he scrolled down. The passenger manifest. Seat 2A, Hayes Damien. His vision blurred. His hand shook. Oh my God! The VP of Customer Relations leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. His voice cracked. They kicked Damien Hayes out of his seat. Sterling's jaw clenched so tight it ached. Not just out of his seat. Off the plane. Off our plane. The executives erupted. Fragment of outrage, disbelief, panic. How could this happen? Who authorized it? This deal was our lifeline. Sterling didn't answer. His eyes scrolled further down, to the name of the other passenger in question, the one who'd benefited from Hayes's removal. Holloway Preston. Sterling's blood went cold. His nephew, his arrogant, spoiled, entitled nephew. A boy he'd gifted courtesy elite status to for his birthday. The room tilted. No, Sterling whispered, but it was there in black and white. Coleman, the purser, had sided with Preston, chosen to appease him, chosen to eject the airline savior in favor of its CEO's nephew. Sterling slammed the tablet down, his voice a growl. They didn't eject a passenger. They ejected the man who held this company's future in his hands. Meanwhile, in a quiet conference room in JFK's Admirals Club, Damien Hayes was already moving on. He sat with his book open, thumb resting on the margin of a page he wasn't reading. His phone buzzed once. A text from Chloe. Notice delivered. Legal confirmed. Termination complete. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without replying. He didn't need to. Somewhere above, Apex's flight to Chicago droned through clouds, delayed, carrying smug passengers sipping champagne in seats not theirs. But the real turbulence wasn't at 35,000 feet. It was in Fort Worth, in a glass tower where panic had just taken root. Damien exhaled slowly, closed meditations, and rose. His reflection in the glass wall was calm, unshaken. He had done what needed to be done. The rest would unfold on its own. The scalpel had been drawn, the first cut made, and at Apex Air, the bleeding had just begun. The first siren didn't sound in a boardroom. It flashed on a phone. At 6:11 a.m. Eastern, while the city outside was still deciding whether to be gray or gold, a push alert popped onto millions of screens. Wall Street Journal exclusive. Seat ejection, deal ejection. How Apex Air lost a $600 million lifeline. Under the headline, a single image, a blurry still from the jet bridge camera. A tall man with a briefcase stepping back through the door. The caption didn't name him, but the article did. Damien Hayes, founder of Ethereal Dynamics. The man Apex had courted, praised, and scheduled to sign the next morning. The story landed like a controlled demolition charge, precisely placed, perfectly timed. By 6:17, it was the most read article on the Journal site. By 6:23, cable news anchors were reading it verbatim, voices slipping from journalistic cool into something close to astonishment. By 6:30, screenshots were everywhere. Hashtag boarding pass trended. Then hashtag boycott Apex swallowed it whole. At 7:01, employees started leaking. Anonymous HR emails. Internal memos. A Slack screenshot where a regional manager joked about optics. A training slide that used the phrase handle perception before policy. A photo of a laminated card. FOF, friends of the family. An expedite code no one had ever seen in writing, but everyone knew existed. None of it was definitive on its own. Together, it was a mural painted in gasoline. At 8:15, a former purser went on morning television with a voice that trembled at the edges. "We were told to make certain passengers comfortable," she said, choosing each word like it might cut her. Comfort didn't always mean policy. The host blinked. The segment cut to commercial with the camera lingering on her face one beat too long. At 9:30, the market opened. Apex's ticker blinked green for a heartbeat, as if hopeful, then plunged. Traders didn't read the article. They read each other. Fears fluent. -8%. -12%. -19%. The floor became a weather system. In a glass room in Fort Worth, executives watched the red line sink like an anchor being dropped into black water. Sterling said nothing. His jaw was clenched so hard his temples throbbed. "Buyback," someone whispered. "With what?" someone else said. "We mortgaged next quarter for the signing." The bell that opens a market is supposed to sound like opportunity. Today it sounded like a starting gun for a race no one wanted to run. At 10:02, public statements began to bloom like algae. Rivals dangled status-matching offers. Switch your miles, keep your status. Screens at airports started to show digital banners from competitors right above Apex's counters, algorithmic ad buys triggered by keywords. Customers took selfies canceling their Apex cards. A celebrity chef posted a video. "We don't accept a culture that treats dignity as an upgrade." 10 million views by lunch. At 11:40, Apex tried to staunch the bleeding. A gray backdrop. A podium. Richard Sterling in a navy suit that suddenly looked like a uniform worn by someone marching backward through time. He paused, looked into the cameras, inhaled. Apex Air offers its deepest and most sincere apology for an isolated incident that does not reflect our values. The word isolated detonated. A reporter in the second row, hair pinned back, eyes bright with the thrill of the hunt, lifted a hand and didn't wait to be chosen. "Is it true the beneficiary of the seat was your nephew, Mr. Sterling? Did your family's status influence crew decisions?" Murmurs rolled through the room. Sterling's face moved almost imperceptibly, a twitch that told the truth before his mouth could lie. "Our policy is..." "To protect family?" Another voice called out. "Is that the isolated incident or the values?" His answer slipped, words desperate to find purchase on a cliff face. The clip hit social feeds before the press conference ended. The captions wrote themselves. At 12:03, the union weighed in. A statement from the Flight Attendants Council. "We refuse to be human shields for executive nepotism." 8 words more dangerous than any rumor. Inside Apex headquarters, the air thinned. Doors opened and closed with the quiet of a hospital. Phone stayed on silent. Faces bent forward, hands white on glass. Sterling stood with the CLO and the VP of PR staring at a dashboard of sentiment analysis that had turned the color of a wound. "Get Hayes," he said. "I don't care how." "We can't," PR said softly. Their counsel sent a cease and desist. All comms through legal. Sterling's mouth shaped a word that never arrived. What about his board? Pressure there. They already posted a statement. PR said. She didn't read it aloud. The title was enough. Dignity is a system requirement. Investors loved it. The public loved it more. The market loved it most of all, just not for Apex. At 12:47, the first class action firm announced an investigation into shareholder losses tied to corporate governance failures. At 1:09, a senator tweeted. At 1:22, a European regulator requested documentation. The problem had crossed borders without a passport. At 2:03, an email left an Apex internal account and landed in a journalist's inbox. A risk assessment from 6 months earlier warning that culture, not cost, posed the greatest threat to a system's transformation. If human protocols are inconsistent, any AI overlay will inherit their failures. The author's name at the bottom, a mid-level operations manager no one in the C-suite could place on site. The kind of person who builds a company a day at a time and is invisible until the building falls. At 3:15, the stock crossed -31%, a number that sounds like math but feels like gravity. The board scheduled an emergency session for 5 p.m. Sterling stared at the city as if it were the past. In a quiet apartment in Queens, Sarah, eyes red from a night of not sleeping. Sat on the edge of her bed and watched the press conference replay on her phone. She'd told the truth. Now the machine had turned toward her like an animal deciding whether bite or run. She had a missed call from a number she didn't recognize. A text, "We can help with legal support if needed." Another, "Thank you for your courage." Another, "Traitor." She closed her eyes, and for the first time since Gate C-27, she let herself cry. Not the short, hard kind of crying that people do in bathrooms at work. The deep, silent kind that reorders your bones. When it ended, she wiped her face, stood up, and opened her closet. Her uniform hung there, dark blue, perfect pleats. She took it down, folded with reverence, and placed it in a box. There are uniforms you wear and uniforms that wear you. The box closed on both. At 3:40, a rival airline posted a single surgical message. "We don't sell seats. We honor them." Underneath, without fanfare, a press advisory. Media availability tomorrow regarding a transformative systems partnership. No names, no gloating, just the shape of a door someone else had closed on themselves. At 4:05, Apex's internal chat channels, which had been a slow burn of rumor and gallows humor, went quiet. A global message pinned to the top. All media inquiries must be routed to corporate communications. Beneath it, a single reply from a mechanic in Dallas. Who routes dignity? At 4:22, a short video appeared. An iPhone-held, shaky clip from the first-class cabin of Flight 417, posted by a traveler who decided their silence was a currency they didn't want anymore. You could hear the purser's voice, the facts clipped and tidy. You could hear a man in a salmon polo huff into a laugh. You could hear the seatbelt click of someone standing up in a way that sounded like refusal turned into respect for oneself. The caption, "This was the moment." The view count spun like a slot machine. At 4:59, the boardroom door shut. On the table, 3 folders. Accountability options, liquidity options, leadership transition. No folder labeled apology. That one had been used up at noon. Sterling began, "We can still salvage." "We can't," the chair said. "We can only decide how we lose." Silence. Then the COO. "We can fire everyone in the chain," he said, meaning the purser, the supervisor, anyone with proximity to the moment. But the narrative is beyond individuals. The narrative is the system, the chair said, and the system has been televised. Outside, journalists lined the sidewalk. Inside, lawyers drew diagrams of a future no one wanted to admit they had entered. And somewhere over the Midwest, in a seat that did not need to be defended, Damian Hayes turned a page of meditations. The hum of the aircraft wrapped him in a neutrality that felt like grace. A flight attendant set a glass of water down with the quiet competence of someone who believes service is an act of respect, not performance. He looked up, met the attendant's eyes, and nodded. The smallest exchange. The foundation of the largest systems. His phone vibrated once. A message from Chloe. "We received 3 inbound proposals. 1 from Meridian, 2 from international carriers, all using the same word in their outreach. Values." He typed a single reply, "Meet Meridian." At 6:12, Meridian's press office sent invites for an 8 a.m. briefing, announcing a next-generation partnership to modernize our entire operations. No adjectives. No adjectives were needed. Everyone could do the subtraction. As dusk laid a purple hand on the city, Apex's skyline reflected back at itself. A mirror no longer flattering. Screens in living rooms and airport bars replayed the day in loops. The headline, the apology, the chart that looked like a ski slope. Strangers argued about corporate culture like it was a sport. Friends texted each other the phrase, "It was never a glitch," as shorthand for all the lies they had swallowed in their own workplaces. By night, Apex had become a cautionary tale told in real time. By morning, it would be a case study. An inferno, for all its heat, had been started by the smallest spark. Someone deciding that a boarding pass meant less than a prejudice, and someone else deciding that dignity was a system requirement. In the glass tower, the sprinkler system finally kicked on in the only way corporations understand. Committees, resolutions, lawyers. Water everywhere. Too late for Flame. 6 months later, Apex Air was no longer a household name. Its logo, once painted across gleaming fuselages and glossy magazines, had been stripped from planes in midnight hangar sessions. Its frequent flyer program, once a symbol of loyalty and privilege, had been dissolved into the corporate belly of a rival airline. The ticker symbol APX no longer blinked on stock screens. It was gone, acquired for pennies on a dollar, absorbed, digested, erased. In business schools, professors dissected the fall with clinical fascination. A single incident, they would say, pacing in front of bright-eyed students, a single boarding pass triggered systemic collapse. Some students scribbled furiously, others laughed nervously, but all of them understood the lesson. Fragility hides in arrogance. For Apex's former employees, the collapse wasn't a case study. It was a layoff email at 2 a.m. It was a health plan terminated mid-treatment. It was uniforms folded into closets, never to be worn again. It was resumes rewritten to scrub the stain of Apex from the header. For Sarah, the flight attendant who had whispered apologies with her eyes at gate C-27 and later found the courage to speak, it was a rebirth. Fired for a breach of NDA, she had been branded a traitor by one side and a hero by another. Within a month, Meridian Airways hired her into their customer experience division, not as a flight attendant, as a consultant. Her task: build training programs that made sure what happened at Apex could never happen there. Her name was quoted in articles. She appeared on panels about workplace ethics. The girl who once passed out champagne now passed out lessons in dignity, her voice steady, her spine straight. And Preston Holloway? The nephew who had smirked as Damien stepped aside? He became a ghost story. The tabloids feasted for weeks. The polo shirt, the popped collar, the arrogance turned infamous. Memes immortalized his smirk beside Apex's stock chart plunging into the abyss. He vanished from boardrooms, from social circles, from the protective cocoon of family connections. No company wanted to touch him. No club wanted him at their tables. His name was an epitaph, shorthand for the cost of entitlement. Richard Sterling, once the Golden CEO, resigned under a storm of shareholder fury. His carefully curated tan, his white smile, his boardroom bravado, all turned brittle under the weight of collapse. He spent his last press conference hunched, his voice hoarse, begging the world to see Apex's death as an accident, not a reflection of his leadership. No one believed him. But Damien Hayes didn't revel in their downfall. He never once raised his voice, never once granted an interview. He moved forward, quietly, decisively. The contract Apex had begged for, the $600 million lifeline, had instead gone to Meridian Airways. The announcement came with none of the fanfare Apex had planned. No champagne, no fireworks. Just a slim press release, 8 sentences long. The final line was a dagger. At Ethereal Dynamics, we believe trust and dignity are non-negotiable. Our partners must believe the same. The market adored it. Meridian stock soared. Investors poured in. The deal was hailed not just as a business triumph, but as a values triumph. Competitors scrambled to echo the language, to scrub their own policies, to rewrite their training manuals. But the first mover was already crowned. Damien visited Chicago, as he had always intended. He walked the campus of his old university with his mentor, Dr. Alastair Finch, who shuffled slowly but whose eyes still carried the brightness of starlight. They sat beneath the oak tree where, decades earlier, a scholarship kid had confessed his fears about belonging. "You've made headlines," Finch said, sipping coffee from a paper cup. His voice was rough, aged. "Half the world is talking about you. Some call you a hero. Others say you destroyed thousands of jobs." Damien looked out at the students hurrying between classes. He thought of his father's warning. He thought of Aurelius's words. And he thought of Gate C-27. "I didn't destroy them," he said softly. "They destroyed themselves. I just refused to be complicit." Finch studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, as if confirming a calculation. Back at Ethereal Dynamics headquarters, the company thrived. Clients lined up not just for the technology, but for what it symbolized. Damien's decision had transformed his brand from a logistics powerhouse into a moral compass. His board, once cautious, now praised the clarity of his conviction. In the corner of his new office, sleek, glass-walled, overlooking the city, sat the same worn paperback of meditations. He kept it where anyone could see, not as decoration but as declaration. On difficult days, he would open the same line. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. He hadn't raised his voice at gate C-27. He hadn't demanded, begged, or threatened. He had simply walked away and let consequence do what anger never could. In airports around the world, the story lived on, a whispered legend told by frequent flyers in lounges, by attendants swapping shifts, by executives lowering their voices over scotch. Did you hear about the CEO who was denied a boarding pass? Shut down the whole airline system in a week. The details blur with retelling, but the heart of it remained. Dignity cannot be reassigned. Apex Air's logo was gone, but its ghost haunted every gate agent who thought about looking at a passenger and deciding whether they belonged. And Damien? He was not haunted. He was sharpened. Late one evening, after a long day of negotiations, he rode the elevator down from the 42nd floor to the quiet lobby. A janitor was mopping the marble floor, humming softly to himself. The man looked up, startled, ready to step aside. Damien smiled. "Take your time." The janitor nodded, relief in his eyes. A simple exchange, a recognition. Because systems fail when dignity is treated as optional. And Damien Hayes had learned and taught the world that dignity, like data, must be absolute. That was his legacy. Not the collapse of an airline, but the reminder that the quiet choice of one man, made with precision instead of fury, could redraw the map of an industry. A single denied boarding pass had become the most expensive lesson aviation had ever learned. And Damien Hayes had walked away not as a victim, but as the author of a modern fable. Principle over profit, dignity over power, clarity over compromise. The oak tree in Chicago still stood. The book on his shelf still waited. The story was told in boardrooms, classrooms, and departure gates. And every time someone scanned a boarding pass, they remembered it was never just a seat. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.